Hello, I'm Sarah, welcome back. If you caught my previous video, you will have seen July's unboxing to know that our capsule wardrobe project this month is the Friday Pattern Company Sagebrush top. Now, this style is massively in at the moment with those balloon sleeves. It's also got a little ruffle detail here. It's got a front yoke, a back yoke, and a little bit of bias binding around the neck. If I turned it round, you can have a little look at the line drawings there, so you can see that yoke detail, a little bit of a tie around the neck that comes from the bias binding, and that optional insert for the trim there. So that's really good. You can use the same fabric, you can use a different fabric, you could even put a bit of lace trim in there to make it your own garment. What I love about this pattern in particular is that it's really size inclusive, so we go all the way from an extra small up to a 7XL, which is bust measurements 32 all the way to 60, and the finished garment measurements on that are 40 inches all the way up to 67 inches. So yeah, it's certainly a pattern for everybody. Now, my bust measurement is 42, so I could have got away with making a medium. Looking at the finished garment measurement, the full bust measurement on a medium is a 44, so there would have been a little bit of ease in there. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut out the large, which is the finished garment measurement on the bust at 46, because I want mine to be a little bit blousy. Now, the fabric that I have got, if you caught the previous video, is a beautiful indigo gingham. And I'm going to have a go on the yoke sections, the front yoke and the back yoke, these bits here. I'm going to cut those on the bias to get the checks going a different way for a little bit of different interest. So I'll take you along for the ride. I'll show you how we do that and talk you through any tips and trips I've got whilst we sew it up together. So let's hop on over to the overhead camera and let me talk you through that. Okay, so I just mentioned then that I was going to have a go at cutting the yoke, so I'd got the checks going on the bias. So all I've done is I've put my pattern piece, so can you see the arrow here? I've just marked that at the top of a check and then just kept it straight going down, and then I've done that with the second piece as well. And then with this, I've cut this out single fold, so I did have this piece on here, cut that round and then flipped my pattern piece. I'm not quite pleased with how that's turned out so far, so we'll see how it comes together in the actual garment itself. But yeah, just literally turned it around 45 degrees. Now, just one thing to bear in mind with this is these two pieces are now on the bias, so it's very, very easy to stretch them out. So if you are an amateur sewer, then maybe don't tackle this method. Stick on the grain line so your fabric behaves itself. Or if you want a little bit of a challenge and you like the way with how mine turns out, then go ahead and do it the way that I have done it. So I'm going to head now and I'm going to do the stay stitching very carefully to make sure that I don't stretch these out. And then I'll carry on with the pattern. I think then next we move on to the ruffle. Okay, so the first bit of construction of this top is relatively straightforward. Like I say, we've done that stay stitching just to prevent that stretching out. And then I've also done a row of stay stitching across the bottom as well with me working on the bias. The last thing I want to do is stretch it out attaching this ruffle. And then the ruffle section I've just ironed in half. Now I've used the grid, the check on my fabric as a fold in half section, just to know that I'm going to put that on nice and evenly. And then yeah, just some gather stitches and then gather it into the front yoke piece. Nothing overly complicated there. And then for the bottom section of the front top, again, between your two notches, you're just going to run a row, 2 rows of gather stitches, and then we're just going to line that up and sandwich in between and sew that on so that it should look something like that. Now I'm really happy that I made the decision to cut that yoke piece on the bias. I think it is, yeah, it's providing a little bit of interest in breaking it up a little bit. So really happy with that. So I'll go ahead and I'll attach this on, and then that'll be the front of our top finished, and we'll start to work on the back of our top. Okay, so for the back, again, really straightforward, nothing overly complicated. For the 2 yoke pieces, we fold those under 1/2 inch and then another 1/2 inch, so we've got a whole inch folded under, and just hem those, and then we just attach around the top of the back yoke and then over edge stitch that seam allowance and top stitch it down towards the hem. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to get our front piece back in. So here's our front piece. We're going to attach these at the shoulder seams and the two side seams, and then we are ready to move on to the bias bound. Yes, so I have sewn the shoulder seams up and the two side seams, and I've over edge stitched the seam allowance, and I've just given it a little bit of try on because I was a little bit worried about the hip ratio and where the top was going to finish, because I have got a wider hip, and if I'm going to wear it tucked in then it'll be absolutely fine, but if I want to wear it tucked out, I feel that it could do with a little bit more room in the hip area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two little vents. So what I've done here is I've measured 4 inches up and I've done a little snip in, but not gone past the seam allowance. And then I've got my split here, and I've ironed that so that it's straight with the seam allowance, and then I've just folded the raw edge under. So I've done that on both sides of this seam and exactly the same on the other side. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew up here, across and down, and just give that a little finish, and that's just going to give the top a little bit of an opening at the bottom, just to allow a little bit more movement in that hip. And if you wear it tucked in, it won't make any difference either. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'm just going to pop a little hem on whilst I'm doing it as well, and then we will move on to pop our neck binding in. So looking a little bit closer at the bias binding then, we've got our pattern piece and we've cut our fabric out within our pattern piece, and then our strip of bias binding, if we fold it in half and iron that to get a crease down the centre, and then open that back up, and then what we're going to do is we're going to get the two raw edges and fold that into the middle on each side and give that a little iron, and then fold it back in half so all of our raw edges are hidden in the centre. Once we've done that and we've given that a good press so that it's keeping its shape, you're going to find the centre of your strip of bias binding, and you will match that to the front centre of your blouse. And what you will do is you'll pop pins in from the front centre all the way around to the back opening on both sides, and you're going to sew that down with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you will notice at each back end that you've got long tails left, and that's okay, that's designed for our ties, so don't worry about that. Once you have, that's Emma in the background, once you have sewn that down with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're going to do little snips to make it lay nice and flat, but make sure you don't go through your stitches. And then what we will do is we'll fold this bias up so the seam allowance is going into the centre of the bias. This is the raw edge of the bias folded into the centre. That's going to fold down round the back, and then what you're going to do is you're going to stitch in the ditch here just to secure that binding all the way around the neckband. And then with your ties, what we're going to do is we're just going to fold that under with a little row of stitching along there, fold that over, and then sew that down as well, and then we are ready to move on to our sleeves. So the sleeve insertion on this garment is pretty normal. You have got some gathers at the top, so what I have done is I sewed around and put all of those gathers at the top, so you've got that really nice balloon sleeve at the shoulder seam. And then for the hem on the sleeve, what I've done with mine is I folded it under one row of squares, and then I've just given that an iron down and sewed that around, leaving a little opening to pop the elastic in. And then over on this sleeve is one that I've already done. So for the elastic measurement, all I did was popped that around my arm and give it a little trim, and then it was just the overlap that is just providing that little bit of tightness, because I didn't want my sleeves too tight. Obviously that is entirely up to yourself how tight you want that elastic to sit. Just insert that in the casing and then go back round and over stitch your opening, and that is your sleeve done. So what I'll do is I will go and I will finish inserting the elastic on this sleeve, and then I will pop it on so you can see what the finished Sagebrush top looks like on me. Here is the finished Sagebrush blouse. She's lovely, isn't she, with those really full sleeves with that little bit of gather on, or you could take them down a little bit, and if you weren't too sure about how full they are, just distribute the gathers a little bit differently than all at the top to take that out. But I really like that, and I think it's actually quite flattering because it makes your top a little bit bigger, so it makes your waist come in a little bit smaller. I'm really happy that I went rogue and put the yoke pieces on the bias to get that crisscross in a slightly different way, and a little bit of frill detailing across the top just gives a little bit of interest. So I have just got this tucked in a little bit here, and to give that little bit of blousiness I will turn around as well so you can see the back. So again, the yoke is cut on the bias to give that crisscross, and then it's got that little bit of a tie there. Yeah, I'm really pleased with it. I did think it was going to be a little bit more blousy than it actually is, so that's something to think about. You could always size up a little bit depending on how much blousiness you would like. This is really great to tuck into trousers, or you could wear it out. So remember, I did that little thing with the hem because I decided that I wanted it a little bit longer after I'd cut it out. So that's kind of what that looks like there, and that allows me to tuck half into my trouser and then leave the back out to create a bit of extra. But that is the length. Now, if I was going to hem as per the pattern, then it would come up to there, which is kind of just on the belly button. So I think maybe it does come up a little bit short. So just remember, when I did that little bit of a twist on the hem, I only turned the hem up ever so slightly and created a slit that was 4 inches. Now on this pattern, the hem allowance is 4 inches. So in effect, I've lengthened the pattern by around 3.5 inches by doing that little bit of a trick that I did. And I think that that is actually more of an ideal length for a top for me anyway, rather than it being too short. So just think about that. If you are making it, the length may just be something you want to consider. So either lengthen the pattern or do the little side split that I have done, and with a tiny hem, just to get around that. But yeah, no, it's a great make. Really like it. There isn't anything too overly complicated in it apart from that little bit of bias binding around the neck. Please like this video, it really helps YouTube to share it to more sewers like yourselves, and please do hit subscribe and be notified the next time a new video goes live. Until next time, keep sewing. Bye.